Hello there, this is Professor Eckhouse, and I am going to be talking to you about section 0.2, Arithmetic with Fractions. The reason it starts with a 0 is because this is a review. So these are things you need to know before we start talking about algebra. So fractions are super, super important for algebra. In fact, I think it's one of the main reasons that people struggle with algebra is when they don't know how to do fractions. And the reason they don't know how to do fractions is because they don't know their multiplication tables. So make sure you know your multiplication facts, and it will make fractions easier, which will make algebra go much more smoothly. Okay, so we are going to talk about a bunch of stuff having to do with fractions: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and reciprocals. So some terminology that you need to know. Oh, if any of this is difficult for you, please use the book. There are videos for every single example. There's an example and then there's a video after it with more examples. And the videos are quite good. So make sure you use the book if fractions are not your forte. So I'm assuming many of you should be looking at the book. All right, so the terminology you need to know for this is first product. What does product mean? It is the result, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, of multiplication. The result of multiplication. Okay, so you need to know these words. They're in the glossary at the back of each section in the textbook. So it's a great place to look for the words you need to know. A factor is something being multiplied. Something being, and that takes at least two things, right? Being multiplied. So if I say 3 times 2 equals 6, then these two here are the factors of 6. There are more. 1 and 6 also are factors of 6. So a factor is something you need to understand what that is, where it comes from, how to find it, that kind of thing. A numerator is the top of a fraction. Top of a fraction. And the denominator is the bottom of the fraction. You need to know that off the top of your head. Okay, so if I had 3/4, this is the numerator, this is the denominator. Okay, so moving on. Some words that you will see that are really important to understand what you're supposed to do. Really important. Find. What do they mean by find? It just means to perform the mathematical operation. It can be addition, subtraction, multiplication, any combination of those things. All right. Simplify means to write a mathematical statement in the smallest terms, so there's no other operations that you can do. So this is often with either order of operations or fractions. Okay, so you're going to combine like terms, do things like that. That means simplify. All right, evaluate is very different. Evaluate means to perform the indicated mathematical operation and then substitute a given value in for a variable. So I might say something like evaluate 3x for x equals 5, right? So you would just plug it in, 3 times 5, you put the 5 in for the x and you get 15. Okay, so that's evaluate. Evaluate is quite different from simplify, solve, or find. So solve we'll get to later. Reduce means very much similar to simplify, but it's writing in the lowest terms. So usually that's in fractions or division, and division is fractions, fraction is divisions. It's the same thing. All right, so I think that's it for those terms, and let's move on. Adding and subtracting and combining fractions, we have to find a common denominator. That is in adding, subtracting, and combining fractions. So the least common denominator is a least common multiple of the denominator. So least common multiple we often call LCM, but it's of the denominator, so that then becomes LCD, least common denominator. So down here we have the steps for adding fractions with unlike denominators. First, we find a common denominator, and then we rewrite each fraction using that common denominator. Now that we have a common denominator, we add the numerators, and then we cancel out common factors. I like to say divide out because we're really dividing them to make one. Okay, so here's some examples. I'm just going to work through all of these. And these, I would recommend, since you're watching a video, pause it and then turn it back on and see if you got it right and watch how I do it. If you got it right, you can skip through it. Then pause it again and try the next one. You'll learn a lot better by trying first rather than just watching me do it, and hopefully you're taking notes as you go. All right, so 1/4 plus 1/3. What you're going to do is you're going to say 1/4, but you're going to leave a long bar like that. That's my favorite way to do these, so I recommend you do it this way. And we're going to find, before we do anything else, what is the least common multiple of 4 and 3? And that is going to be 12. So that is the least common denominator for this, okay, is 12. So now we need to try to make 12 here and 12 here. So what are we going to do to make 12 in both of those cases? So I have to multiply this times 3. So I have to do it to the top and the bottom. Multiply this times 4. Do it to the top and the bottom. Okay, so whatever you do to the top or the bottom, you have to do to both, numerator and denominator. Now I'm going to multiply straight across the top, and I get 3 over, and 4 times 3 on the bottom is 12. So 1/4 is the same thing as 3/12. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So make sure it makes sense, that you didn't do something weird, because that happens a lot. And we get 7/12. Okay, next one. We're going to do 3/5 plus 7/15. So again, the first thing I do is I look for a common multiple. Well, 15 is the common multiple here. So the least common denominator of these two fractions is 15. So that means the second one is done. We don't have to do anything to it. So we've got, I'm going to move this up so I can write on the line, 3/5 that we're going to have to convert plus 7/15. Okay, so how do I get from 5 to 15? I have to multiply by 3. So I have to do it to the top and the bottom. So we're going to get 9/15 plus 7/15 to give us 16/15. Now for doing math, that is an improper fraction, but for doing math, this is the better option, okay? Because so you might have some problems on the homework that ask you to change it to a mixed number. I don't prefer that. So I prefer this one because we can do math with it. 1 and 1/15, it's really hard to do math with that. All right, the next one. First things first, let's look for a least common multiple of 4, 6, and 8. And I know that to be 24. So the least common denominator is 24. All right, so none of those are 24, so I'm going to have to do a bar for each one. So I'm going to say 3/4 with a long fraction bar, 1/6, and 5/8. So the goal now is to get 24 on the bottom in the denominator of every single fraction. So how do I get 24 with 3/4 with a 4? I'm going to multiply by 6, top and bottom. And now this is going to be 24, right? So the next one, how do I get 24? Well, the other way, multiply times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. 8 times what is 24? 8 times 3. So top and bottom times 3. So now we're going to rewrite this. And we are going to get 18/24 plus 4/24 plus 15/24. All right, so if you add 18, 4, and 15, you should get 37. So I get 37/24. The 24ths stay the same. If you're going to change that to a mixed number, it would be 1 and 13/24. I'm going to leave it as an improper fraction because, again, better for doing math. All right, subtraction is the exact same process, except we just subtract the top once we get the common denominator. So what is the least common denominator here of 5 and 7? They're both prime, so you just multiply them together and get 35. So if they're prime, it's pretty easy, just multiply them together. So 1/5 minus 1/7, converting them to have a common denominator. So 5 is going to be times 7, and 7 is going to be times 5. All right, so I get 7/35 minus 5/35. 7 minus 5 is 2. 35 stays the same, and that's our final answer. All right, 5/6 minus 3/4. So I'm going to look at the 6 and the 4, and what is the common denominator here? Least common denominator. A lot of people would say 6 times 4 is 24. That's not the least. It's not going to give you the wrong answer as long as you simplify. But many people forget to do that. So try to go for the least. What is a smaller number that 6 and 4 both share as a multiple? And that would be 12. Okay, so we're going to try to get 12 on the top and bottom. 5/6 minus 3/4. So 6 times 2, so I've got to do top and bottom again, and 4 times 3, top and bottom. All right, so I get 10/12. Does that sound like 5/6? Yes, it does. And 3/4 converts to 9/12. So I've got 10/12 minus 9/12 is the same thing as 5/6 minus 3/4. And that gives me 1/12. Okay, so that is addition, subtraction, and combining. So addition and subtraction are technically combining. Okay, multiply fractions. Multiply means of, another way to say that is when using fractions. When using fractions, if we say 1/4 of, like so 1/4 of blank means 1/4 times blank. That's what it means. Okay. All right, so multiplying two fractions, make sure you understand this concept. If I have A over B times C over D, then I can put A and B times C over D, like that, with the A and the C on the top and the B and the D on the bottom. So it means the exact same thing. You can work it either way. I often just leave it as the first way because it's less writing. So more than two fractions, same deal. Notice we have taken this and just put them all together. Okay. All right, so either way you want to work it is totally fine. All right, so let's look at these. We've got 1/3 times 2/5. So that basically just means 1 times 2 over 3 times 5. And you don't have to write that step down if you see it. It's fine. Don't take shortcuts until you're really good at things, okay? All right, so now we are expected to also reduce. So I always reduce first. I don't like doubling up my work. I make things as simple and straightforward as possible when I do my own math, and so I share that with my students as well. So the best way to work these is to factor things out so that you see that things are going to cancel. So I see a 5 here, and I see 15 has a 5 in it, right? And I see 4 here, and I know that 16 has a 4 in it. So I'm going to rewrite this so that I've got 4 times 3 times 5 over 5 times 4 times 4. So now what happens, do you think? So hopefully you remember that things divide out. If I have a 5 on top and a 5 on the bottom, they divide out to make 1. 5 over 5 is 1. I have a 4 on the top and a 4 on the bottom. They divide out to make 1. So you can, what we always call cancel. Most people call it cancel. I say divide out because there's lots of ways to cancel, so it gets a little bit confusing to just use that word for everything. All right, so that is going to give us 3/4. All right, you could multiply it all out to get 4 times 15 is 60, 5 times 16 is 80, and reduce that. You might see that the zeros, are going to cancel out because those are tens, right? So this becomes 6 and this becomes 8. But now you have to reduce it again, right? 6 over 8 because they're even. So now you would divide this by 2 to get 3 and divide this by 2 to get 4, and you get 3/4. Okay, so I just do it the first way. Finding the factors and canceling them out, dividing them out right from the very beginning. All right, the next one. We've got 2 times 1 times 3 on top and 3 times 4 times 7 on the bottom. And I wanted to show you another way. It's a little bit more of a shortcut, but these 3's obviously are going to divide out to make 1. So, of course, they both just become 1. Divide them both by 3 and you get 1, right? Now I see a 2 and a 4, 2 on top, 4 on the bottom. And what I think to myself is they both have a 2 in them. So I'm going to say, how many times does 2 go into 2? 1 time. How many times does 2 go into 4? 2 times. What am I left with on top? 1. What am I left with on the bottom? 14. Okay, so that's another little bit of a shortcut for canceling out and simplifying a fraction. All right, so if you know how to multiply and do reciprocals, you know how to divide. So first we need to talk about reciprocals. Okay, so there's 2 pieces of terminology that you need to know. So a quotient is the result, just like product is the result of multiplication. Quotient is the result of, what do you think? Division. All right, the reciprocal, 2 fractions are reciprocals if their product is 1. So how would that ever happen? I'll show you. All right, so the original number here is, let me see if I can get this to be a little bit smaller. No. Okay, so the original number here is 2/3. The reciprocal is 3 halves. So to test the product over here, I'm just going to do this a couple of times, so I didn't include it. 2/3 times 3 halves is going to be 6/6, or you can think of it as the 3's cancel, the 2's cancel, and I get 1, 1, 1, 1, right? So 6/6 is just 1. So the product is 1. In other words, flip it over. Flip it over. All right? So you try the others, see what you can do with them, because they get a little trickier. So pause the video and give it a try. Okay, so if the original number is 1/5, the reciprocal is 5/1, or just 5. We don't write 5/1, we write 5. So, but you have to know that that means 5/1. So 1/5 times 5/1, 1/5 times 5/1 is just 5/5, which is 1. Or you can think of it as everything canceling. All right, how do you take the reciprocal of a whole number? So a whole number is over 1, so that means its reciprocal looks like that. And again, if you multiply those 2 together, you just get 1. How do I take the reciprocal of a mixed number? So here's an example of doing math with mixed numbers. It's a mess. So let's fix this. Let's turn it into an improper fraction, because you can't find the reciprocal of a mixed number unless it's an improper fraction. So how do you make this into an improper fraction? Remember, you multiply these 2 together, multiply, and then add the 1. Okay, so we're going to get 12 plus 1 is 13/4. Okay, so what is the reciprocal of 13/4? That is going to be 4/13. And again, multiply them together, and everything cancels out, and you get 1. Okay, so remember that this is just a whole number, so 1/1 is what 1 actually is. So what's the reciprocal of 1/1? Well, it's 1/1, or just 1. So the reciprocal of 1 is 1. It's the only number that is its own reciprocal. 0 is over 1 as well. So when you flip it over, you get 1/0. And this is undefined, because you cannot divide by 0, right? Undefined. So the reciprocal of 0/1 is actually, the answer is undefined, or does not exist. In the Lumen homework, the answer that is keyed in for you to say it's undefined is DNE, does not exist. Okay, dividing then is multiplying by the reciprocal. So for all division, you can turn the operation into multiplication by using the reciprocal. Dividing is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, okay? Another thing that I've heard people say is keep, change, flip. Keep the first number, change the division sign to multiplication, and flip the second number. Keep, change, flip. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like. So we get 2/3 divided by 4. So I'm going to change that to 4 over 1, right, to 4 over 1. So now keep the first one, 2 over 3. Change the division to multiplication, and then flip the second one, 1/4. Okay? So now I've got 2 times 1 over 3 times 4, and 4 is 2 times 2. I'm going to go ahead and write it as 2 times 2, so it's really easy to see what's going to cancel. And I planned that because I saw the 2, so you got to plan ahead a little bit. 2 cancels out, so on the bottom I have 6, on top I've got 1, so 1/6. So think of this as 2/3, right? 2/3 is that much right there, and I'm dividing it by 4. So in other words, you know, what's one, if I divide this into 4 pieces, I'm just talking about one of them, right? So that's 1/6. All right. When you say divide, it means how many of these go into it. So I'm saying in the next one, 5 divided by 1/2. How many 1/2s go into 5? How many 1/2s go into 5? All right, so I've got 5 over 1, which I'm going to write like that since I'm doing fraction work with it. And then I'm going to change to multiplication, and I'm going to flip the second one, so I get 2 over 1. And this becomes 10 over 1, which we write as 10. So think about that. You have 5. You're looking for how many 1/2s. Well, there's 2 halves in every one, and you've got 5 of them. So there's 10. Okay, next one. 2/3 divided by 1/9. So I keep the first one. I change to multiplication, and I flip the second one. Okay, so you can rewrite this if you want to, or you can say, I see a 3 on the bottom, and I see a 3 in the 9. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write the whole thing out, though. So I'm going to say 2 times 3 times 3 on top, and 3 times 1 on the bottom. And I'm going to see that a 3 divides out top and bottom, and I get 6 over 1, which is just 6. Okay, so always simplify to this version, 6. We don't say 6 over 1 in the real world. Okay, next one. Keep the first one, 3/5. Change to multiplication, and flip the second one, 3/2. So be careful. A lot of people will see these 3s and go, oh, they cancel out. Well, it's not. You can't do that. It's not multiplication, it's division. And once you flip it, you can see that it does not cancel out. It becomes 9/10. Okay? So that was addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of fractions. That was a lot of material in one place. If you need practice, there's lots of practice in the book. Take advantage of it and try the practice problem, the practice assignment that's due in Lumen as many times as you want to. All right, thanks for watching.